The Why Didn't You Test That podcast want to improve your software. The team at Curiosity and their guests share experiences and insight on the many sides of better software delivery.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the next in the episodes of Why Didn't You Test That? So joining me today as guest hosts, I've got Ben Johnson-Ward. So hi Ben, do you want to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Hey, I'm Ben. I work here at Curiosity Software as VP of Solutions Engineering. I've been doing some very different things with testing for a long time, so hopefully we can find something I haven't tested.
Joining us as a very special guest we've got today, Alex Martins. Hi Alex.
Hey Rich, hey Ben, good to see you guys. I'm the VP of Strategy here at Katalon. Been trying to see how we can make sure we have the proper strategy for this crazy new world of AI and
Cool.
having fun testing.
I've got a little bio for you, Alex. I'll just quickly read that one out. All right. So Alex is a seasoned leader in technology industry with extensive international business experience in agile software engineering, continuous testing, and DevOps. Starting out as a developer and then moving into software testing, Alex rose through the ranks to build and lead quality engineering practices across multiple enterprise companies from different industries across the world. Throughout his career, Alex has led transformation of testing and quality assurance practices, as well as designing and enhancing organizational structures to support the culture change necessary for successful adoption of modern software engineering approaches such as Agile and DevOps, and how these things being further transformed with generative AI. So there we go. There's Alex for you, for everyone who doesn't know. As Alex kind of alluded. Yeah? I didn't write it, I must admit.
I could tell.
So as kind of Alex was alluding to then, you've recently joined Katalon. So for all the listeners who aren't aware of who Katalon are and what you kind of do at Katalon, do you want to give a bit of a quick intro around Katalon and yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So Katalon is a quality management platform where you can do all of your testing. You can have all of your testing needs addressed by the different pieces of Katalon. We like to think as the one-stop shop for all of your testing needs. And more recently, when I joined a few months ago, we've been working with our entire product teams and also go-to-market teams to really try to understand what are the core use cases that are a good fit for applying AI and helping our customers achieve value, right, or realize value. Because what we've noticed even before joining Katalon is that with the AI hype, it's very easy to be tempted to just create features that are AI powered. But in the past year, we haven't seen a lot of real benefits for the testing community like we have seen on the development community. So as we're working through the new strategy for the current year, we are considering that and putting that top of mind for us and making sure we have the right elements in place for delivering real use cases that add value and not just things to say, hey, we have it too.
So you touched on kind of the AI hype, and possibly we're through the kind of the marketing euphoria now, and moving into kind of real world use cases and things like that. What in terms of the discussions that you've been having with customers, how are those discussions kind of evolved over time through initial people just exploring what's out there, listening to some of the magical stories on the internet, I'm sure, through to more real world use cases that you're being asked to kind of give consultancy or give solutions on today?
Yeah, that's a great point, Rich, because like in the past year, everybody was talking about AI and about the possibilities of AI, right? Hey, with AI now, it's enabling us. It will enable us, right? It will enable us to do this and that, and oh my God, it's awesome. And we have seen in the development community a lot of enhancements and productivity gains, tremendous benefits, right? And on the software testing and quality side, we kept hearing about possibilities, only possibilities. It'll be great when, what if this? And I feel like what we have been hearing in the past few months is that the community in the software quality space is getting tired of that, right? It's like, hey, enough with the possibilities. Show me some real results. Show me actual use cases that I can use AI so that I can make whatever current state is better, right? So I think that's been the major shift in the software quality space, and we haven't seen anything yet that is revolutionizing the way people, the way software testing professionals do their work, similar to how developers do the work. One thing I want to call out is when we think about AI in software test automation, right? Usually the use case is the same use case as a development use case. So that's why I kind of like to differentiate software testing professionals' use case for AI versus development use case, which is code generation based on a certain input, right? You generate code on the other end. So test automation engineers are leveraging that use case as well, but that's not specific to software testing. That's software development coding type of use case.
So Alex, what do you think is like holding back the value there? What do you think is the difference? Because you've obviously outlined where it's the same. Where is it different in such a way that it is holding it back?
Yeah, so I think the main difference is that when people approached the thought of applying AI to the software development space, people approached it from the human in the center of it, right? The developer, the person writing the code. How can we apply AI to help that person become a lot more productive, a lot more efficient, get things right the first time, and so on. So how can, looking at it through those lens, how can I apply AI to get those gains? When it comes to software testing, we haven't really seen that same approach. We've seen, hey, those guys are getting benefit. Let's see if we can, cook something up here real quick to show in a demo, right, or to put it in an article or blog. So I feel like now it's that moment of realization that, all right, people are starting to think, what are the day-to-day activities of the different software testing professionals in their different roles? And now let's map that out and see where we can apply AI to make those activities, faster, better, higher quality, and so on and so forth, right? Because the classic, um, you know, generation or like test case generation from requirements. You put it in, a large language model. You get test cases on the other side. That's something cool, and there are test cases on the other side. But what we're seeing is that as testers, it's in our DNA, right? First thing we do, you would expect to see, okay, let me take those tests and run them and then see what the results were, which is what the developers do, right? So they get the code based on whatever they prompted, and then they run the code. If it works, they move on, right? But with the testing mindset is different. The first thing a tester does is they look at the test and they think, well, is this test right? Because they're now thinking, I gave the large language model this input, and out the other end came this output. Does it make sense, right? So they are now testing the LLM itself instead of testing their own application. And we've seen, in working with different companies, we've seen lots of testing teams actually slowing down because of that. So their productivity went down because now they're testing the output of the test. They don't like it in the end. They think, well, I could do better, or this is missing, or this is way too much. Like, it's overcomplicating something that really should be simple. And then they just get rid of it and they create their own tests, right? At the end, that's like, and then they do that because they trust what they are doing. They trust, their SME knowledge, and they don't know how the inner workings are.
Do you think the difference there with, say, a developer route is the reason they contrast it compared to, say, developers who can, and why it's productive for them and not for testers, is about, if I'm a developer, when I'm given code by an LLM, I have a relatively objective way of measuring it in terms of, sure, there's some things where measuring correctness, then requires testing and unit tests, etc. But hey, if the API call shoots off and I get a response, I have a very objective measure that the code did what I wanted it to do. Whereas if my test, its return is, hey, it passed, I don't know if it checked the things that make sense to check, right? So the correctness isn't about an output of yes, no. The correctness is what checks were done under what circumstance. So that's a little bit less of an objective output. I'm wondering if you feel that's part of it, or if it's more along the lines of, hey, like you were saying earlier, which was kind of rather than like how applicable AI is to these problems, more like, how well have people built the products surrounding these AIs to serve like the kind of tester kind of workflow compared to a developer workflow?
Right. No, I think it's the former. I mean, I think you're spot on. It's really for the developer, what they're thinking is, hey, I have this story, right, that I have to, write code for. As long as I meet that definition of done, right, whatever it is, or to your point, as long as that API call is made and I get a response and the response is, what I wanted or what I expected, I move on. I'm not going to keep iterating through that code anymore to now imagine all the different possibilities, because I trust that the model is giving me, a good enough, maybe not perfect, maybe not the best, but it's good enough for me to move on. And they know that down the line there will be additional checks, right, and verifications and validations by other members of the team, by other parts of the team. Whereas with testers, inherently we think about, hey, my responsibility is to make sure that whatever it is that I'm looking into is that it's doing not just doing things right, but it's doing the right thing, right? And for that, I have to use my knowledge, my background, my domain knowledge to test it in many different ways. And even when I have a test case, I may have a series of steps to follow, but as I go through those steps, as a tester, I am thinking about other things that are not scripted there, right? That are not specified. And
Do you,
and I
Talking
think
about like implicit assertions there, Alex. Like kind of
yes, yeah. It's
do you
like,
think
hey,
that? Do you think there is a
I'm
cap
moving.
though?
Sorry, go ahead.
Given that, do you think there's a cap on how much AI can be exploited within the realm of testing? Because I guess
Cap in what
this is
sense?
where I would draw parallels towards. I think AI has made a problem that's always been there more acute, right? In terms of
Hmm.
almost as you described it, right? If a unit of code can be developed in the small, right? But then when you start to build it out into systems fitting together, systems integrating what we test, there is a combinatorial explosion, right? And therefore there is a big problem in terms of how do you manage that. And the way that people do manage it is through a lot of head knowledge,
Hmm.
right? And
Yes.
therefore there is a big problem in terms of AI and LLMs don't have organizational context.
Hmm.
And so, how much time and effort are a company wanting or an organization wanting to put into training an LLM onto their organizational context to start getting that viable outcome that they want from an AI generated, capability? At the
Right.
moment, a lot of the conversations that we have around AI, and Ben, please correct me if I'm wrong, I think they're fairly superficial in terms
Hmm.
of the way that companies want to adopt AI, and almost I don't think that they recognize the long haul of kind of investment. I don't just mean that in money. I mean investment in terms of actually understanding how systems work, actually getting that information out of people's heads. I'm not sure they're willing to put the hard yards in to really exploit it in the way it could really be exploited.
Hmm. Yeah. No, and
I
Ben, you
don't
want to
know.
go for it first?
yeah, sure. I mean, I guess what you've made me think of there, Rich, is I've been thinking earlier about, hey, is one of the other reasons that maybe it's currently better at, for example, working on development code is the question I ask myself is, at the level developers are working on, is development code are the problems more self-similar than
Yeah,
perhaps, for example, they are for testing where things are more bespoke? So that general context that it's got from learning from all code that's out there is more helpful than it is, and all the code tutorials and all of
yeah,
that stuff is more helpful than it is in a testing context where, for example, if I'm, doing a thing and sorting a list or whatever, that's kind of the same everywhere. Whereas, there might be bespoke things, but where I'm testing something, my expected results are literally the business logic. I probably wouldn't ever think to put a cap on where AI can help us. I think that's probably like betting against the future a little bit. Like all of that organizational context, I think will eventually be made available. I mean, if there's something we can know, then can an AI know it? I would probably bet in the long run, yes.
It's a
But
big
it's
big
a
leap
question of like
between
when and how. Yeah, but sure, for sure. But like you can imagine an AI that starts, messaging somebody on Teams to ask a
yeah.
clarifying question, for
GPT-4 is
example.
doing screenshots, isn't it? GPT-6 or 7? Brain extractions.
Exactly. So like, and I think, in terms of like where it's applicable now, I think with like very, very sophisticated product wrapping, there's like quite a lot of places. With very specific places, it's going to be, a night and day thing already, right? Where you have problems where it is very, very applicable. The only other thing that, me and Alex kind of have in common to the other thing you said, Rich, is, when it comes to, hey, our organizations having kind of superficial conversations and not realizing the scale of the change and mindset change. Like when Alex and I were at our previous company together, there was kind of a moment with, when GPT-4 was coming out where, we were at a small company where it was very much an entire company 100% shift and like a very clear message that, hey, everything we do is centered around this. And, it was that kind of a company. But I think if you want it to be central to your testing, it can't be, a cherry on your, on the cake in the end.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It raised an
Yeah.
interesting point then in terms of, as larger organizations, and I don't mean kind of software development organizations, I mean organizations, like banks and people like that, right? As they start to want to adopt LLMs, inevitably there is a hurdle to overcome around, the security, protecting IP versus LLMs, and inevitably you've got to think that they will start to build up their own LLMs, right? It's an interesting one to me. You mentioned there around satisfying a test use case. Do you think the actual test use case goes away to a certain extent and it's actually just a knowledge pool, a very intelligent capability that both IT and the business use?
Yeah. So we're seeing that starting to happen now, kind of tied to your previous question as well. With the context that the LLMs are being given today, which is not it could be industry specific, but not company specific, right?
Yeah.
And there are limitations, especially on the testing side, right? That you can make advancements on. To Ben's point, I agree with him completely. From a development perspective, it's easier to extract value because things are more like the domain specific knowledge or the company specific knowledge is not as important as it is in the testing side, right? So for testing, we're seeing that there are some limited gains that we are seeing when the use case it has the person or the tester, let's say, in the loop, where the tester is
Yeah.
actually interacting with the AI as a partner, right? As an assistant, not so much, hey, look at this and give me an output. Like that is not really the right way. We've established that already from the experiences in the last year. But it's hard to come up with those use cases, and they will become more valuable for testing when the LLM is given that internal company context. And what we're seeing, happen literally in the last couple of months, we're seeing a lot of those large enterprises, to your point, Rich, putting together or establishing AI committees to basically write the AI policies for the entire enterprise, right? And the thing is, they themselves are not sure how to write those policies. What are the constraints that we should put in? What are the restrictions? What are the boundaries, right, of what we share, what we don't share, et cetera, in terms of data? So they're learning themselves how to work through that, and it's happening real time. And the goal is, we're seeing as part of that effort also a lot of pilots being kicked off in the enterprise, where those organizations are establishing their own large language models, and they're finding, it's extremely hard and costly to feed it, right? To basically fine tune it,
Yeah.
give it access to their internal data, to their IP, fine tune it, make sure it's ready for providing answers, right? And so that's happening now. Like in the last couple of months, we're seeing many organizations get that kicked off. But again, it's new to everybody. It's new to them. Nobody has the right answers. They are literally
Yeah.
learning as they go. But it's exciting because then as we are talking to them, it feels more like a partnership. Like we're all sharing whatever it is that
Yeah.
we learned, whatever scars we have, so they don't fall into the same traps. And it's an iterative process. So it's an interesting time in the market where nobody has the right answers. We're all trying to help each other out and and achieve some real value through AI.
Yeah. I think you
Funny.
made a really interesting point there around, I think there's you will hear the scare stories around will AI replace testers and things like that, but I think you made a great point, right, in terms of actually is it an aid towards enhanced collaboration? And I actually think it is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I agree. I don't see it the other way because look, who's going to use the application that we're building? Like who's the end user? Is it a machine or is it a human? It's a human.
Yeah,
So as long as humans are the end users, there's gonna have to be the human touch to
yeah,
basically say, is this the right thing? I think the machine is great at doing, at evaluating if it whatever was built the right way, but it cannot, determine if it was the right thing to be built, right?
yeah,
Or if it
absolutely.
was, So I think that's something I've been having a lot more conversations. Is that like it's not gonna like AI is not gonna replace humans as long as we are the ones that are going to be the end users, right? Nobody is going to confidently release something to their end users as humans without somebody from the business or from the company saying, is this what I think my users will need? Or is this the new capability we're releasing to our users that will generate this benefit for the company and for the users, right? So I think it's more that partnership. It's more of that augmentation. It's a tool. It's a new
Yeah,
Yeah.
tool for
it's
us
it's the
to
co-pilot,
use.
right? It's the co-pilot rather
Yeah,
than the pilot. I kind of I
yeah,
read that on LinkedIn the other day, and I
yeah.
like that.
Mm.
What are your thoughts, Ben?
Just two thoughts I have on that one, right? The first is like if you think about, okay, what is it lacking? It's lacking an understanding of, what is correct, right?
Mm.
If you think to like a kind of maybe, how near or far some future state where, all available information about what is correct and even the ability to go and find or ask for that information is available, then you can start to have it, doing these broader verifications. But even kind of in that setting where it's going and asking somebody, hey, is it supposed to be this or this, because like I'm doing all of these things, and you might even be in a world then, by the way, where you might decide that the whole idea of test cases is kind of being our memory of what we check because we put in all this time to designing it. In that setting, it might even be redundant to an AI that is kind of doing a continuous checks over quality based on its understanding of how it should work. So its core thing will basically be, here is how it does work, right? That's essentially what it's going to be able to present to you. And I've understood how it should work from, requirements and things I've read and people I've talked to. But, whether it's a quality person or a tester or someone, the interface to that AI will basically be understanding what it thinks, how it does work, and kind of having conversations with it about how it should work. So it might be that the AI is primarily talking to a product owner, right, or some person responsible for quality who's a product owner, or something like that. So I think that the interface is still going to be somebody having to have a conversation with it, a co-pilot. It might not be so much checking its work, looking at test cases, or even kind of like finding all the distributed information that is available about the application. But it's the same person who today is deciding how a product should work is,
Yeah,
would basically be able to interact with that AI to, either contradict information that it has or update it. And maybe the AI is like, oh, well, if you're telling me this, I might go and change that in Confluence or in the ticket, by the way. Or perhaps, actually, this is currently not in line with what is coded there. Are you aware of that, right? There is one other case, though, which is, and this is something that has been around in other forms, but AI has slight additions to it, which is there are things which, and again, this is why it works better for development. There are things which are always wrong, right? So if you think, hey, this is a question about expected results, everything we've been talking about, there are also things that are just always wrong. Or, hey, it's very likely that this is wrong no matter what I look up in the Confluence page, right? No matter what the use case says, it probably shouldn't say 504, right? It probably shouldn't have all these failing requests, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that, having AIs be able to, identify those things, et cetera. One of the challenges that, me and Alex have faced in like prior companies and customers we've talked with when you're trying to have AI help with that kind of thing is, at least for the moment, and again, I'm not betting against the future of AI, the challenge of doing that operationally today is how stateful applications are and the things that kind of get in the way of that, causing all of the situations that, customers find themselves in, causing all of the places an app can be. Apps are fundamentally very complicated. So if you don't connect up the AI to being able to kind of control those states, then you're kind of hamstringing it a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, and also like furthering that point there, Benny. I remember we had many conversations in the past that with customers that the challenge the testing side of the world, right, was having and continues to have is that these large language models, they are inherently, it's just how they're built. They people like the output cannot be explained, right? It's not, the output is not explainable. So if a tester looks at the output and the tester wants to know, okay, but how did you arrive at that conclusion, right? How did you arrive at this thing? If I provide its input, there's no traceability there. So that, as in the tester's mindset in itself, is a huge red flag. Right? How am I going to trust this tool if I can't trace back to the, how the reverse engineering, right? Your response. Like if you think about traditional test automation, hey, the code is compiled. The code is compiled. You know how the compiler works. You trust it. It's always going to give you the same response if you put always the same output. So it's reliable. You trust it, right? And same thing, like when you have a hammer, you hit the nail. Like you have to put a certain amount of force, but if you put the same amount of force, the nail's going to start going down. But with AI, it's different. It's not explainable. It's not repeatable, right? So another big characteristic that testers require to trust, whatever tool they're using is it needs to be repeatable. If I did this once and I do it again, will I get the same output, right? So no, the answer is no. Inherently, that's not possible today. And then more importantly, in the banking, domain and insurance and healthcare is auditability. Like, is this output auditable? Like if tomorrow the auditors come here and say how this application or this process, then there's no traceability. I can't go back to actually understanding how this test was created by the LLM, right? So I think the repeatability, explainability, and auditability are three big major hurdles that we'll need to figure out how to overcome when we use large language models for testing.
Do you think we care more about repeatability because we kind of, our brains are wired to a test case context, right? Whereas maybe my AI doesn't always look at the same things, but perhaps it can still be valuable, right? If you imagine an AI kind of equivalent to like, an exploratory tester, or maybe an AI that gives me an output that I kind of leverage over time. I don't necessarily need it to kind of give me tests or execute tests in a repeatable way. Is repeatable something we've kind of gotten used to, but maybe is more flexible than the other things that you're saying?
I think it's. No, go ahead, Rich. You're eager
I was
to talk.
going to say, I think you're absolutely right. I think where you're going with that, Ben, is we can't understand what's changed today, and therefore we repeat tests to make sure things haven't changed, i.e., regression. If there is a better way of doing that, and I guess AI provides us a better way upstream, monitoring code, understanding changes of code, monitoring flows and integrations and things like that, why do you need to do those things if you can understand it at a very lower level? And I would suggest there are better alternatives.
I think, like, I agree, but I also look at it from a different angle, right? Beyond testing, right? I think repeatability is a characteristic that us as humans, we get comfortable when something is repeatable, right? We talk about, hey, if we want to accomplish something in life, if we want to get really good at something, we have to repeat and train and train and train and repeat, because we know if we do the same things over and over again, eventually we get better, right? So the repeatability aspect is beyond technology. I think it's just human nature. So if you think about a tester in that context, and you are even doing exploratory testing in an application, you know that if you're, you know, moving or asking the application to move money from account A to account B, and you're exploring different aspects of that transfer, you know that it's always going to move the money this way, this particular way. You're not trying to all the time validate everything, because you know, like, as you maybe you have a 7-step flow that you need to test, and you're doing that in an exploratory fashion. You know how certain parts of that flow will always work the same way, and then you explore other things. So if now with large language models everything is variable or nothing is repeatable, then you don't. It feels like you're testing the same thing over and over again in a million different ways, and you can never know if you have if you get comfortable with it, that it's actually working the way you expect it.
Is there a big problem in that though? And I'll say in achieving coverage, I don't mean coverage in the sense of how do you maximize coverage. When you run tests today, there has got to be a critical set of tests that need to be run and need to pass for someone to, you know, give it a tick in the box to then promote those things. With AI, if you're not able to do that through prompts up front, which would be a very long prompt to actually give it, how do you make sure that you've got that minimal viable test coverage, if you like, come completion of those tests? All you're doing really is back-ending that analysis after the time, aren't you? And any tests that weren't run, you have to go and then do.
I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
the thing that I would think about with that, Rich, is like, I don't have like a strongly held opinion on this, but what I kind of think about is like, you know, do we have a bias here towards, you know, when we want a critical set of test cases because it has some coverage, the reason why we trust in that is kind of the reason we check, you know, we care about like a checklist if I'm, you know, flying an airplane, right? It's because that checklist has had a lot of time put into it by like a committee. We've thought about it over time. We've added to it. It's basically a summary of our knowledge from a lot of time, right? Because we can't think of everything every time we come to run our testing. But if we're thinking, okay, if it's not our brain being involved here, or maybe if we're not even using the concept of a test case, you know, I think for now, when we're still, even with our interactions with AI, mostly still via a medium of test cases, I think it's still relevant. My question would be, would it be strongly relevant forever? And that's going to be based on how much we trust it, right? So for example, if we say, you know what, I spend all this time building up some critical set, but actually statistically, just letting my AI do whatever it wants, it tends to find, you know, 90% of things anyway. We're not at that point. We're not necessarily close to that point. But, you know, I think it might be a soft requirement for now. And in the long run, it might be something where, hey, that kind of whole summary of knowledge and the committee part of it, if an AI can do that on the fly, whereas it's a summary of knowledge over time for us, maybe it doesn't need it in the same way we do.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting time because we're like the thought of having the AI autonomously test the entire application. I think that's something that will happen eventually. But again, in the end, who's going to use the application, right? It's somebody, it's a person.
Yeah.
So there has to
It
be
comes
that.
down.
Yeah.
It comes back to that explainability bit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure it can do it and it can do it well, but actually it needs to explain that it's done it to the human because ultimately they are accountable, right?
Right. Exactly.
Did you see the story in the news about Canada Airlines and the chatbot? Did you catch
No.
that?
Yeah.
So there was a story this week around a passenger. I believe they do some kind of discounts for certain criteria of traveling, and the chatbot said that you can get the ticket, we'll refund you afterwards. That wasn't the case. So the guy bought the ticket, they wouldn't give a refund, and Air Canada's defence was that the chatbot wasn't them, and they couldn't be accountable for what the chatbot said,
Wow.
which to the layman is a crazy stance, right? In terms of,
So
but it's
Rich,
an
that's really
interesting.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like we had So one of the things that I kind of been thinking about a lot lately is kind of like, forget having AI help us test. What about testing AIs? And I think the most
Yeah.
common case of that is not directly testing AIs, but probably for most people, most listeners, it'd be testing AI-driven applications, right? Normally, there's some LLM made by some big company underneath it, but how you use it is very critical. For example, if you had a Lang chain there where one of the questions is, hey, is this making a promise on pricing to a customer? Is one of the questions that an AI asks the other AI's response. Like that's the kind of thing, that new kind of testing that a lot of people aren't used to, right? So like for me, the other interesting thing going on other than like how can AIs help us with testing is we have this whole new arena of things to test that need like new techniques because there's like new development methods, there's new failure modes, right, that we're not used to. It might not be relevant in a few years, but right now context windows still matter. Although Google just kind of put one out with 10 million tokens, so maybe not for long. But things like that, where you have like chains of AIs talking back and forth, you're not necessarily testing the AI, but you might be testing your safeguard, right? Or you might be testing how you chain those things together. Or you might have, I don't know if what the AI says is correct. I don't have expected results for that, but I know it should never do X, Y, Z, right? I know it shouldn't contain profanity, shouldn't swear at the customers. I know that it shouldn't make promises on pricing. Some of those expected results, right, we can just measure with code, right? Like, for example, we can look for illegal words. We can look for formatting things. Some of those we can have an AI, maybe even a stupider AI, a cheaper AI, quickly check, hey, does this make a promising on pricing?
Yeah. And I think that field there, Ben, that I'm starting to hear, like I won't say that I'm hearing a lot yet, but I'm starting to hear from some of our customers, especially the large enterprises that have those pilot LLMs on-prem being kicked off. They are thinking about how to test as they fine-tune the model. How do I test that it's good enough, right, with our own IP? So I'm seeing this 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 imminent desire, right, to think, how can I bring my testers who have tremendous SME knowledge of my company, right? How can I bring my testers into the fold in those pilots so that they can use all that knowledge and domain knowledge and testing expertise to help me gauge whether the model is trained in a good enough way that I can have my marketing department, my purchasing department, by whatever, to extract or to receive value from the outputs of these LLMs, right, in their unique use cases. So the tester's role, I feel like, in the years to come, is going to be even more relevant, not just for the traditional testing, apps development and testing applications world, but also in establishing those internal LLMs in these large organizations, because they're the ones who hold the SME knowledge, right? And they're the ones who have the testing mindset to help the organization do that in the right way.
I think that those communities are going to have to build up a little bit of a new kind of mental model of, how these applications are put together and, the kinds of testing and verification that one would do, right? They have this whole like lifetime of knowledge of how people put together regular code applications. And now things have shifted a bit, and I think you kind of need to build up a new framework to think about everything with. So, for example, like when you were talking about fine tuning of an LLM, right? That's a different use case from, say, using an LLM fine tuned or not to is part of a broader application or retrieval augmented storage, et cetera, et cetera. So, for example, splitting off the verifications which are about efficacy from the verifications which are about functional things like, hey, do I always manage the context window correctly? Or like, if I'm doing something where I want to pass a piece of context but the context could be too big, if I have a load of code for filtering down that context, like removing pieces of web DOM or whatever it is, does all of that work is separate from, hey, is it finding me the things that I need? How do I test that, right? There's some tests people do of like kind of new LLM models when they drop is things like, hey, let's give it a maximal context window, put some like key pair halfway through it and see how often it finds those, right? I think testers will be completely capable of doing that, but it's a new mind shift where they'll have to borrow some things from what AI researchers are doing and some things probably maybe more commonly understanding how these lang chains, how these sets of models are put together. I think distinguishing, where you have AI making production decisions or like exposure to customers from, say, things where it's always intended as an accelerator. So, hey, does a mess up slow you down or like fully block something? Like a kind of, does it, hey, this test is not going to run without this AI functioning properly, versus, hey, the AI didn't make me a suggestion today. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's a new world out there, whereas while some people are afraid of what's my role going to be, and I think it's the opposite. It's like my role is going to be even bigger. I'm going to take an even bigger role in helping my company establish these models within our premises with our own data, fine tune it, and it's going to be a never ending process, right? It's something that it's just going to be there for the years to come.
Cool.
Do you think?
So, go on, Ben.
Well, so Richard, for you and Alex, I'm curious what you guys think. If you remember, like when record and playback or kind of other things that we've kind of been through testing, there's often been kind of like slightly optimistic kind of like views on it where, maybe in a short term before they got good or whatever, where it's like, oh, so now I can delete X department or whatever, right? Kind of like doing the dollar sign. I'm wondering if that's something that, you guys are kind of seeing with customers, or like kind of pitfalls for some of that stuff that is happening, and how that's kind of maybe would play out in an AI setting. Because you can see a lot of potential for that kind of thing, even maybe before certain things are ready and mature. How are we going to tell when the tooling or the AIs or the approaches are mature for different use cases?
Yeah, so how many times have all of us heard that manual testing is dead, right? It's because of automation. It's never the way I look at it is test automation has its own role in the software development lifecycle, and some things just have to continue to be manual, right? So some of the reasons we talked about, like, at the end of the day, it's a human using it. Exploratory testing is extremely important, and you just can't automate. Test automation is great for regression testing. Like, hey, I already tested this once manually. I just want a quick validation that nothing broke with my current, release. Great. AI is going to enable other kinds of gains in the SDLC that will complement the gains that automation and manual are bringing today. So I don't think that there is such thing as, hey, this is going to replace that. And just like in the automation space itself, you have your scripted automation and you have record and playback, you have low code, no code. I think all of those different approaches to automation have its own place because they address different use cases, right? So I think it's AI is just a new tool, an awesome tool that we haven't yet figured out the how awesome it can be. We're still just like dipping our toes in that world of possibilities with AI. I think my realization after a little over 1 year that we've had AI, Gen AI readily available, or easily available, if you will, is that for the testing space we have to put the tester in the center, right? And then think about the day in the life of that person, the activities in the day to day, and then envision the use cases where the technology can help us. I feel like the first year, as with any new technologies, everybody's excited. We're thinking, hey, technology allows me to do A, B, and C, but is that really what the users are going to want to do it, right? Is that what they will embrace? Kind of similar. We've seen a similar cycle with the Apple Vision now, right? Hey, what was the name of the Google Glass, I think, right?
Google Glass, yeah.
Way back when. It was so it's just a matter of maturity of these different tech. Even cloud, like, remember when cloud came out? Can you imagine, like, back then the companies were like, what? Hosting my infrastructure someplace else, like outside my firewall? No, like, and then it took some time, but it happened. So I think as people figure out the use cases and how to put the right safeguards around, the company data, the IP, etc., I think it will just be things will get more clear over time.
Do you think that that's something where it can maybe be accelerated, or people can kind of learn or go and provide guidance about where these things are going to be most applicable, or kind of the nuances that kind of matter here, right? Like one of the classic ones to anybody who's like really tried it is, hey, one way I can make my AIs be more precise is, rather than ask it to evaluate something which is maybe there is a code answer to, give me code that generates the answer, right? Is the classic case. How do we kind of like make that knowledge more widely known? Maybe to, you see people who will kind of like ask an AI to basically do that thing where they ask it to directly generate things almost in a naive way. I know there are courses out there. They're often about kind of like using AI in applications, etc. I mean, I'm wondering for like a test manager, or for somebody running a quality organization, or even a CIO, what are like the key things that they need to kind of keep in mind? At least that what are the unknown unknowns from their perspective that maybe we can make known unknowns?
It's a complex question. But the way I look at it, right?
Are you not calling out a precursor to the
Yeah.
LLM right there?
I guess what I'm talking about, right, is like, I'm thinking, what are going to be the classic traps that maybe we can help people in those organizations avoid in their thinking? What can we tell them? Where can we point out, you don't know about this yet? You need to look up this. You need to learn this. These are things, these are the basic kind of like rules of the game that you would learn via, messing up and mistakes, but maybe we can help you with ahead of time.
Yeah, the way I look at it is more like people now are generally aware of the possibilities. Most people haven't yet rolled up their sleeves and try to interact with different models on their own. And most the peoples that have, most of them, like you said, were just doing very basic prompts that are really not leveraging the power of the LLM. I myself, I'm learning still a lot every day on how to refine the way I interacted and to get more meaningful answers. But the way I look at it is, it's an interesting time because it's the chicken and the egg thing, right? As usual, the do organizations get this or create a mandate or whatever for their staff to actually upskill themselves on large language models, right? Prompt engineering and etc. Or do they first, and then so like now they're upskilled, but they don't have a platform to actually practice those skills because the company doesn't have a large language model with their own data, with their own IP. And so where are they going to use those skills? Or do they create first that platform, their internal large language models, and then train people to actually, leverage that capability? So I think what's more likely to happen is I think companies will be pushed by their own vendors, right? Software vendors, infrastructure vendors, like everybody that is a vendor to that company. All these vendors are coming up with new capabilities that are powered by AI, and it's forcing those companies to get more comfortable with AI and sharing data faster than they would like. And it's uncomfortable. So that's why they're scrambling with AI committees and all that kind of stuff. But it's a forcing function because all the people that they buy from, right, are now have AI capabilities. If I don't get my stuff together here, then I'm not going to be able to buy from them anymore. And I'm going to have to do things by myself, which I don't have the skills or the capacity, etc. Right? So it's a forcing, the vendors themselves are being like a forcing function, and then to accelerate that process. And along the way, as their own staff interacts with these tools that are now augmented by AI, it will become more natural for them to learn that without anybody having like a top down, hey, you have to learn type of thing. So it's slightly different from the past, at least from my experience, where like the rules that we have seen in all the technological transformation in the enterprise in the past, at least for the past 20 years, those rules don't apply directly. It's kind of things are happening much faster in different ways, and and that's making a lot of people uncomfortable. But the possibilities are still keeping those changes alive, because the kind of possibilities people have talked about in the past year, you just can't look the other way, right? And there are some early results, especially on the business side, business results that are validating what AI can do if used in the right way. And obviously, companies don't want to look the other way. Coming from to the testing world, testing, I think, is one field that still hasn't experienced that same kind of transformation or value achieved by using AI. And I think this year is we're going to start seeing some good results being shared.
There's probably a rabbit hole that I'm conscious of time, and there's an element of risk in vendors going down that vendor route, a solution looking for a problem, and almost, to those organizations, what problem you're actually trying to solve with full stop, with AI, possibly with bracket other solution. What actually are you trying to do with it? Because I'm not entirely sure others are aware. It's just they're doing it, and so I must do it.
Right. Yeah.
But
it's
there's an element of, back to that. If you are trying to understand your systems better, get faster feedback, whatever, elicit knowledge in a much faster way, what problems have you got today which means you can't do that?
Right.
And
I
that
think
might be the problem and the hurdle to actually adopting LLMs.
Yeah, it's that herd mentality, right? And we see that in many industries. Like, hey, one guy's doing it, I have to do it as well so I can stay competitive and check the box, right? But I think in testing specifically, last year was the year that we saw exactly that. It is not good, right? So everybody was coming up with solutions, and then they were looking for problems. And I think this year, at least from on my side here, we are looking at, like I said earlier, the testers' activities and the day in the life, and working with customers and mapping out their workflows, right, from a testing perspective, and then thinking with them what are the improvements that you would like to do in your workflows, and then we're, as vendors, then we're putting our thinking hats, and really trying to envision what would a better workflow look like, validating with customers and all that before we actually go in and build it. So we have a lot of these initiatives already kicked off. We are launching a flagship capability here pretty soon, and then have others in the pipeline. And they're all being built with that mindset, is that not just create something and then look for a problem. We're actually solving real problems with AI, and we hope to have good results to show to the world, in a couple of months. So it's an exciting time, and it feels different than the previous transformations.
In terms of like the investments, whether it's building a product or as a customer, fine tuning, or like the processes you build around it or upskilling, I'm wondering if it like makes sense to keep some of those investments like relatively lean, or like kind of building a product in a very like iterative way. The reason I say that is because you might build a whole bunch of stuff around it, having lots of AIs talking to each other, etc. And then a new model comes out and maybe half of that was irrelevant, right? So I'm wondering if it makes sense to kind of go wider than deeper when we're kind of investigating these products and these capabilities, or building things internally. If, in a year's time we have a GPT-5 and it can start doing more of these more function calling, and it can have a much wider context window, and maybe a lot of this was kind of wasted effort on our part. On the other hand, you don't know what's going to come out. You don't know what it's going to be capable of. I mean, on trajectory wise, you would think maybe quite a lot, but maybe there's things that for sure it's not going to be good at, and you focus on building those to kind of like encompass it. If things are kind of like, hey, right now I'm building a bunch of things because it's not quite good enough at this, but I think it will be eventually, maybe that's not the thing to prioritize.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think the way you sort of future-proof yourself, right, as a company, I think it's putting the end user in the center, right? Because if you have now a better tool, GPT-5, 6, and 7, et cetera, it will just make that use case even better than before, and better than before, better than before. I think the problem lies where in those companies that come up with solutions that are fully based on, GPT-4, and then they're looking for a problem to apply that solution, and then now all of a sudden there's GPT-5. Oh man, like this solution makes absolutely no sense anymore because GPT-5 does that inherently, right? And you get it for free, if you will. So I think if you underpin your strategy with the user in the center, you are in a much better position to just continue leveraging the iterative, nature of, the evolution of LLMs that are going to happen in the next year. So that's how I see it.
Right, gentlemen, we are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to close it up here. Really great thanks for your conversation, your inputs, your insights. Really appreciated. Thanks, Ben, for being the co-host with me. Thanks, Alex, for coming along and being our guest. Really appreciate it. And to everybody listening, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Why Didn't You Test That podcast. To continue the conversation, head over to curiositysoftware.ie. And don't forget to subscribe for more episodes.